Hi there, everybody. This is Lee, and I'm talking about the Commission on Presidential Debates with this video. There's been news that the Commission on Presidential Debates has done the unprecedented. They actually decided to give us a little bit of transparency and reveal what polls they used to decide the 15% average that they use as the baseline to allow into their presidential debates. Everyone besides the Republican and Democratic Party up until now has had to poll at least 15% in order to be allowed entry into a televised forum to communicate with North American public. And so for the first time, they've actually revealed what polls that they intend to use. And I'm going to get to which polls those are, but in the meantime, I'm going to say that there is a brief history of how the Commission on Presidential Debates took over from the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters actually ran a non-partisan debate format ever since 1974. They started running the televised debates during 1974. These debates were non-partisan, meaning that they weren't bipartisan, and they certainly weren't partisan. Any candidate deemed viable was allowed into the debate, and so John Anderson entered the debate and competed on stage. He was an independent, and he competed with a Republican and a Democratic candidate. And then the Commission on Television Debates took over in 1988, and they decided that it would be a bipartisan, that it would be only Democratic and Republican candidates allowed access to televised debates. And they created a lot of restrictive criteria, such as the major candidates could not step outside that format. If they went into another forum and tried to debate outside the Commission on Presidential Debates, they would be excluded from any future debate. So the Democratic and Republican candidate had to be exclusive to that format. They couldn't just go on PBS or, to someone's high school gymnasium and have a debate outside that system. So they created a lot of restrictions, and it was a bipartisan format rather than nonpartisan where independents could have entry. It was bipartisan, only Democratic, only Republican. They did allow Ross Perot entry into these debates in the 1992 and 1996 race. Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush each thought Ross Perot would take votes from the other, and so they said, sure, let him in. And it turned out Ross Perot cut into George H.W. Bush's voter base. Maybe he took a little bit of Clinton's. He polled pretty high. I believe he got 22% of the vote. Bill Clinton, he did not have a high majority, but he had more than anyone else to become the president of the United States. And during that debate, Ross Perot lit into both of those candidates about NAFTA. He really went to town on both of them and made some really great points. People didn't bother to listen to him. His giant sucking sound analogy, which was apt, only it was more like a toilet flushing. And here we are today, and people are saying, oh, he was right. But during the debates, he was seen as an irritation, a voice that no one wanted to hear, especially big business, especially oligarchs. And he was a multimillionaire, Ross Perot. But he had a very clear grasp on the economic system, and he was not afraid to say exactly what he meant and what he saw was being wrong with these trade deals that were harmful to North Americans. And he was right. And unfortunately, he was too effective. And so from after that, they had the 15% baseline put into place, the Commission on Presidential Debates. They put that 15% baseline into place for third-party candidates. And then we fast forward past 1996, where Ross Perot polled even lower. And then we go up to 2000. But I will say this as a side note, that Jesse Ventura in Minnesota was a third-party candidate. He was an independent. He was independent or Reform Party, one or the other. And he was a third-party candidate. He was polling at 10%. Until he was allowed entry into debates, probably for the same reason Ross Perot was. They said, oh, he might take more from the Democrat, let him in. Oh, he might take more from the Republican, let him in. Jesse Ventura entered the debates behind and came out the winner of that race in Minnesota for governor. He was not supposed to win, and he did because he had entry into the debates. People said, anything but the Republican and the Democrat will vote for, and boom, there you were. Minnesota had Jesse Ventura as governor. Okay, and so it's a 2000 now, and Ralph Nader is polling. He's drawing numbers. He's drawing polling on the left, on the far left, and then Pat Buchanan is drawing polling on the far right. And so there are strong left and right, ultra left, ultra right candidates applying pressure on both Al Gore and on George W. Bush. And unfortunately, they were not allowed entry into the Commission on Presidential Debates, Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan. And it's a shame because even though their platforms were far left and far right, they both answered to issues left unaddressed by both major party candidates who were weak. George W. Bush, Al Gore, who lost his own state. That's how weak a candidate he was. You know, we can respect him as a politician on some levels, but he lost a large amount of votes, not only to Nader, more than to Nader, he lost votes to George Bush. He lost 13% of the electorate to George Bush. Then he lost some to Nader, about 2%. And then he lost some to Pat Buchanan because people voted for Pat Buchanan accidentally, apparently, in the state of Florida. It was a mess. But anyway, Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan were not allowed entry, even though Ralph Nader spoke very deeply to a lot of domestic issues that people wanted to see addressed, and he could have raised those issues in debates. And then Pat Buchanan actually answered a lot of foreign policy issues that people really wanted to see addressed. Pat Buchanan had a limited view of military interventions. He wanted to take it down a notch or 1,000. That could have been addressed in the debates, and it should have been addressed in the debate. But people did not want to hear it. And then we have the Iraq War, but, let's move on from that. But that was the unfortunate part of having bipartisan debates. It should have been nonpartisan. We could have heard from 4 candidates and had a clear, a strong view of our domestic policy and a foreign policy as a result. Okay, so moving forward, we had Ralph Nader. No, not Ralph Nader, but there were still third-party candidates, but there was so much demonization in our mainstream media towards third-party candidates that they did not do as well. Ralph Nader, no, I think it was David Cobb was the Green who ran in 2004. Did not poll as high as Nader. And then Cynthia McKinney, unfortunately, ran against Barack Obama, a very popular candidate, in 2008. And then we had Jill Stein, who ran on the Green Party ticket in 2012, again against a very popular president and Barack Obama. But I do believe that they should have been granted entry into the debates for the sake of improving our domestic policy and our foreign policy. We've got our foreign policy that's really out of control now. It's crazy. And now we have, we're up to 2016. And again, there's this desire by the oligarchy that controls the Commission on Presidential Debates, that controls our media airwaves, that actually even controls the two major political parties. They want to close access off to only oligarchy approved presidential candidates. And, maybe they'll allow Gary Johnson entry because he's a pro-business, pro corporate friendly deregulation kind of a candidate. They say, well, we can get with him. We can kind of like work with that. And he's pro Trans-Pacific Partnership. So what's not to like about Gary Johnson? Jill Stein, not so much. She's more of the anti-corporate candidate. She's the candidate that's pro-human, pro-populist, pro-people, pro-citizen. And so she is very much juxtaposed to the oligarchy. But anyway, that's a little history on the Commission on Presidential Debates. They run bipartisan debates. They do not run nonpartisan. It should be a nonpartisan debate, but it's bipartisan. It's him and him only, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, Coke or Pepsi only. And there should be more voices for sure, because our American policy has just gotten so inbred. It's been inbred to the point that we've become a nation that's sick. We're weakened, and it's a sick nation. People are saying, make America great again. America was never great. Well, America's great right now, and it's just a lot of talk, but there's been so much inbreeding in our domestic and foreign policy that is just, we've become a weaker nation as a result of voting for lesser evil year after year. So anyway, they're saying that there's criteria. They've released the criteria of how they allow entry into the debates, and they've finally named the polls that they intend to use. And let's see, the polls that they intend to use are the CBS-New York Times polls, the Fox News polls, the CNN Opinion Research Corporation polls, the NBC-Wall Street Journal polls, and the ABC Washington Post polls. Those are the polls that they intend to use to judge the baseline of 15%, that average, on whether there should be entry of this candidate into the Commission on Presidential Debates. So that's a step forward. At least there's a little bit of transparency. Here is where the problem comes in. Two of those polls do not include Jill Stein in the questioning. All five of those polls include Gary Johnson, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton. However, only three of those polls include Jill Stein. Two of those polls, Jill Stein is not an option. She is never an option on those polls. So it's Gary Johnson, Hillary Clinton, and then Donald Trump, who are being polled fairly. Jill Stein's being left out of two, so she's being handicapped. She's behind the 8 ball, and that's just kind of strange. But what can you do? And this is Fox News and CBS-New York Times. CBS-New York Times and Fox News do not include Jill Stein in their polling. So she's basically at zero. She doesn't exist in terms of the polling, so that brings down her average. While Gary Johnson's giving a fair average of 5 different polls, Jill Stein's given 3 out of 5. And so more than any other candidate, she's her polling's being rigged. And it is rigging. We can say that there's transparency, but there's not equality. There's not fairness. There's not equal access. And so that's a problem. There's news articles that speculate that it's far better to use another kind of criteria, and that is any candidate who has a mathematical possibility of achieving 270 votes from their ballot access. They're in enough states, they have ballot access in enough states to actually achieve 270 electoral votes. That candidate should be allowed onto the debate stage because they can viably achieve higher office. There's 4: Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump. So, we're talking about, and that's just a concrete baseline right there, whereas the polling can be jiggered. Ballot access is a little bit more, I would say, fair. It's still relying upon arithmetic, mathematical possibilities, but it seems like it's a little bit more commonsensical and a little less open to interpretation and rigging, we'll say. So anyway, Jill Stein is going to be achieving some television access. She's going to be on CNN on August 17th. I think it's 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. She's going to be having her town hall. So she will be exposed to a national televised audience. And I think that will assist her with her polling. But as long as she's getting a 3 out of 5 average, whereas the other candidates are getting 5 out of 5, she's always going to be behind. And maybe Gary Johnson will be provided entry where she'll be locked out because of this type of arithmetic that the Commission on Presidential Debate seems to want to do. And, we can speculate that they're trying to use Gary Johnson to break down Donald Trump's support. And if Gary Johnson is granted entry, he will dampen Donald Trump's support and falsely inflate Hillary Clinton's voting. Whereas if Jill Stein were included, there would be more balance on the left and the right to provide the North American public a full spectrum of political views. But anyway, we can speculate on reasons why. We can also speak on what actually is and go from there. Hopefully, if enough people contact the Commission on Presidential Debates, there'll be some reasoning, clearer reasoning used here. Or even if they contact the pollsters and just say, okay, why are there just 3 entries on this poll and you just have other here instead of Jill Stein? I think that makes sense, So that's where it stands today. We've got a month and a half to go until the very first debate, so anything can change. I mean, some things are changing right here with just them publishing which particular polls that they're going to use. A month and a half is a lifetime in a political season, and the game is moving over here and over there, and people are moving over here, and this is happening, that's happening. So we'll see what happens between now and September 26th. I'm sure Jill Stein's working on her plan B, but plan A would be to get into the debates, to have equal access, fair treatment, and the ability to present her case on an equal footing, just like the other candidates who have a statistical chance of winning the presidency.